There is a haircut that women over 60 get talked into every single day in salons all over the country, and it is aging them. Not dramatically, not in an obvious way you could point to immediately, but slowly, quietly, in the way that makes you look in the mirror one day and think, when did I start looking so tired? And the worst part, most women don't even realize it's happening. They went in for something practical, something easy. Maybe their stylist recommended it. Maybe they just figured, I'm in my 60s now, this is what makes sense. And they walked out looking like someone's idea of what a woman their age should look like, not like themselves. I've been talking to women about this for a long time. And the thing I hear over and over again isn't, I hate my hair. It's something quieter than that. It's, I just don't feel like me anymore. That's the part that sticks with me. So that's what this video is about. Not a makeover, not a dramatic transformation. Just getting back to looking like yourself, but with a little more intention behind it. I'm going to show you 3 haircuts that actually work for women at 60. Not because they're trendy, not because some celebrity wore them, but because they work with the way your hair actually changes as you get older. The texture, the density, the way it behaves differently now than it did 15 years ago. These cuts work with all of that instead of fighting it. And 2 of them, I think, are going to surprise you. But before we get into it, if you're new here, I talk about hair, beauty, and style specifically for women who are being told what they can and can't do based on their age. If that sounds like your kind of channel, go ahead and subscribe. I try to make things actually useful around here, not just pretty to look at. Okay, let's start with the problem because I think it's worth naming properly before we get to the solutions. The haircut I'm talking about, the one I'd really love for you to stop getting, is the one that's short all over, rounded close to the head, usually pretty uniform in length and just sort of sits there. It's not terrible. That's part of why it's so hard to talk about. It's just not doing anything for you. It's not framing your face. It's not giving you movement. It's not working with your features. It's just there, being safe. Stylists tend to recommend it because it's manageable. It grows out relatively neatly. It doesn't require a ton of maintenance between cuts. And for a lot of women, that sounds appealing, especially if your hair has started to feel like a lot of work. I completely get that. But here's the thing. There's a difference between a haircut that's low maintenance and a haircut that's given up. And that cut, it's given up. And I want to be really clear. This isn't about shaming short hair. Short hair on women over 60 can be absolutely stunning. Some of the most beautiful, most striking hair I've ever seen on women in their 60s and 70s has been short. But there's short hair that looks intentional, that looks like a choice, and there's short hair that looks like a default, like something that just happened over the years. Like you kept cutting it shorter and shorter because it felt easier, and one day you ended up here, and you're not really sure how. Most of the women I talked to ended up in that second category. And almost none of them chose it consciously. Here's what actually happened, and this part is important. Your hair changed, that's the real story. After 50, and especially heading into your 60s, your hair goes through real physiological shifts. Estrogen levels drop, and estrogen is one of the hormones that supports the hair growth cycle. So what you'll often notice is that hair grows more slowly, sheds a little more, and loses some of the density it used to have. The texture can shift too. Hair that was once smooth might become a little coarser or wirier in some areas, or finer in others. Some women notice their natural wave disappears. Others notice new wave appearing where there wasn't any before. None of this is unusual. It's actually really common. But the problem is that most women aren't told any of this. So when their hair starts behaving differently, they assume the solution is to just cut more of it off. Keep it short, keep it simple, deal with it. And their stylist, who maybe hasn't had a real conversation with them about what's actually going on with their hair, goes along with it. So you end up in this cycle. Hair changes, you cut it shorter. It doesn't quite look right, you cut it shorter again. And at some point, you're sitting in a chair getting a cut that isn't really for you. It's just the path of least resistance. That's what I want to interrupt today. Because the answer to changing hair isn't always less hair. Sometimes it's a different approach to the hair you have, a cut that understands what your hair is doing now and works with it, not against it. What is the one thing about your hair right now that is driving you the most crazy? Is it the volume or lack of it? Is it the texture? Is it that it just won't do what you want it to do no matter what products you use? Or is it that you've had the same haircut for years and something just feels off but you can't quite name what it is? Tell me, seriously, because the more I understand what's actually going on for the women watching this, the more useful I can make future videos. And honestly, sometimes just naming the thing out loud is the first step to figuring out what to do about it. The first cut is the lob, the long bob. Now, I know some of you just had a reaction to that. Maybe you've had a bob before and it didn't work for you. Maybe you tried one a few years ago and something about it felt off. If that's you, stay with me for a minute because there's a really good chance the problem wasn't the cut. It was the specific version of it you got. The lob, done right, sits somewhere between your chin and your collarbone. Not above the chin, not at the chin, below it. That length is important, and I'll explain why in a second. The ends are soft, not blunt. There's a little movement through the lengths, maybe a touch of texture, nothing dramatic. It's the kind of haircut that looks like you woke up and your hair just did that, which is honestly the best thing a haircut can do for you. Here's why it works so well for women at 60 specifically. Remember what I said about hair losing density and movement? A lob adds both of those things back visually. The length gives the hair somewhere to go. It moves when you move. It has a swing to it. And movement reads as life and health to the eye. A very short, close-cropped cut removes all of that movement. The hair just sits there. And hair that sits still, especially finer hair, can start to look a little flat and heavy even when it isn't. The length of the lob also does something really specific for your face. It frames it, and for most women, that framing draws the eye upward, to your eyes, your cheekbones, your features. That's always a good thing. Now, the collarbone length piece. Why does that matter? Because if the lob creeps up too high, it starts to lose its shape and its benefits. Once it gets to the jaw or above, you start getting into a different silhouette altogether, one that can actually emphasize roundness in the face rather than elongating it. The length below the jaw is what gives this cut its elegance. Don't let your stylist talk you out of that length unless you genuinely want to go shorter. The lob works especially well if your hair is fine to medium density. If you have thicker hair, it still works, but you might need a little more texture through the ends to keep it from sitting too heavy. And if your hair has some natural wave or curl, a lob can be genuinely beautiful. The wave has enough length to show itself properly instead of just puffing out at a short length. We'll get into the second and third cuts in the next part. And those are where things get a little more interesting. So we talked about the lob. And if that first cut felt a little familiar, a little safe even, good. It was supposed to. I wanted to start with something that feels accessible because the next two cuts are where I think a lot of women are going to have to push through a little bit of resistance. Not because they're extreme, they're not, but because they're different from what most women over 60 have been told is appropriate for them. And that word, appropriate, is one I want to sit with for just a second, because I hear it a lot in this space. Appropriate for your age, appropriate for your face shape, appropriate for your lifestyle. And sometimes that word is genuinely useful. It's pointing you towards something that will actually work for you. But a lot of the time, in my experience, it's just a polite way of steering you away from something the other person has decided isn't for you, without really asking. So before we go into cut number 2, I just want to say this. The cuts I'm about to show you aren't for a specific type of woman. They're not for women who are brave or fashion forward or whatever else. They're for women who want to look like themselves. That's the only criteria that actually matters here. The second cut is what I call the soft layer cut. And I want to be careful about how I describe this one because the word layers has gotten a bad reputation in recent years. And honestly, not without reason. If you've ever asked for layers and walked out looking like your hair had been attacked with thinning shears, you know what I'm talking about. Heavy, choppy layers that took all the weight out of your hair and left it looking stringy. Or layers that were so uniform, so perfectly even all the way through, that they actually made fine hair look thinner because there was nothing left to give it any substance. That's not what this is. The soft layer cut is strategic. It's not about putting layers everywhere. It's about putting them in specific places, primarily around your face, and leaving the rest of the hair with enough weight to behave properly. Think of it less like a layered haircut in the traditional sense and more like a structured cut with intentional face framing. Here's what it actually looks like. The length sits somewhere around mid-neck to collarbone, similar to the lob we talked about. But the defining feature is what happens around the face. There are longer, softer pieces that angle toward the chin or collarbone. Not dramatically angled, not a severe A-line, just a gentle slope that pulls the eye toward your face. Those pieces move slightly differently from the rest of the hair. They have a little more freedom. And that movement, that gentle difference in length around the face, is what does the heavy lifting in this cut. The rest of the hair, the back, the lengths, keeps its weight. That's the part most stylists get wrong when they hear layers. They go in and start texturizing everything, and by the end, the hair has lost all its body. With this cut, you're specifically asking them not to do that. So why does this work so well for women at 60? A couple of reasons. The first is what those face framing pieces do visually. When hair angles toward your chin and jaw, it naturally softens that area. As we get older, the jaw and lower face can change shape slightly. It's completely normal. It's just what faces do over time. And a cut that draws a soft line toward that area, rather than a blunt horizontal one across it, is almost universally more flattering. It's not about hiding anything. It's just about choosing a line that works with your features instead of cutting across them. The second reason is even more practical. This cut is incredibly versatile in terms of styling. You can blow it out smooth and it looks polished. You can let it air dry and it looks relaxed and natural. If your hair has a little wave to it, those face framing pieces will pick up that wave beautifully and frame your face in a way that feels almost effortless. And on days when you just don't have the energy to do much, which, let's be honest, is a real consideration, this cut still looks intentional even when you haven't done a lot to it. Who is this cut best for? Women with medium density hair who want something that feels a little more flexible than the lob. It also works really well if you've been wearing a more uniform cut for a while and want to introduce a little movement without making a dramatic change. It's not a big leap. It just looks like a more refined, more considered version of what you might already be doing. When you sit down with your stylist, don't just say, "I want some layers." I know I keep saying that, but it really is the thing that causes the most miscommunication. What you want to say is something like, "I want face framing layers that angle toward my chin. Soft, not choppy. I want to keep the weight in the back and through the lengths. Please don't texturize or thin out the ends. I want to keep the density there. And I want the overall shape to feel like it's drawing attention toward my face, not away from it." That last line might sound a little unusual to say out loud, but it tells a good stylist exactly what you're going for. You're not just describing a technical cut. You're describing an intention. And a stylist who understands what you're trying to achieve is going to do a much better job than one who's just executing instructions without context. One more thing on this cut. If your hair has started to go gray, or if you're in the middle of transitioning to gray, the soft layer cut is genuinely one of the best things you can do. Gray hair, real, natural gray, often has a slightly different texture than pigmented hair. It can be a little coarser, a little more wiry in places, a little less cooperative. And a cut that has some movement and intention built into it works with that texture rather than just sitting on top of it looking stiff. The face framing pieces especially tend to look beautiful in gray because they catch light differently and give the hair a kind of luminosity that a blunt uniform cut just doesn't have. I'll do a whole separate video on transitioning to gray at some point because there's genuinely a lot to say about it and it deserves its own space. If that's something you'd find useful, let me know in the comments. It helps me figure out what to prioritize. All right, cut number 3. I need you to not close the video when I say this. The textured pixie. Still there? Good. I know what just happened in your head. You pictured the haircut your aunt had in 1987, or the one that your stylist suggested years ago that you politely declined. Or maybe you actually got it once and it wasn't quite right, and you swore you'd never go back there again. Here's the thing though. What I'm describing is not that haircut. The traditional short pixie, the one that tends to get recommended to women over a certain age almost by default, is short all over. Close to the head, tight around the ears, very little length on top. It's practical in the extreme, and for some women it genuinely looks incredible. But for a lot of women, especially women whose hair has changed in texture or density, it creates a roundness around the head that isn't flattering. It emphasizes the skull shape rather than the face, and it removes all the movement and texture that makes hair look alive. The textured pixie I'm talking about is a different animal entirely. The defining feature is length on top. Not a lot. We're not talking about a mullet or anything dramatic, but enough. 2 to 3 inches on top, minimum. Enough that you can actually style it in a couple of different directions depending on what you feel like that day. The sides and the nape are tapered, shorter, cleaner, but not shaved down to the skin. And the whole thing has a slightly undone quality to it. Not messy, not sloppy, just not rigid, like it was styled with intention, but not with a ruler. If you're dealing with significant thinning, particularly at the crown, which is where a lot of women notice it first, a longer top with some texture and lift can actually create the appearance of density where there isn't much. When hair is cut very short all over and it's also thin, there's nowhere for it to hide. The scalp shows through and the overall effect is that the hair looks sparse. But when you have a couple of inches of length on top that you can style with a little volume, you're working with what you have instead of exposing what you don't. The tapered sides also do something important. They create contrast. When the sides are cleaner and shorter and the top has more presence, your eye goes up. It goes to the top of the head, to the face, to the features. That upward movement is the opposite of what happens with a round, uniform shortcut where the eye just kind of stops at the outline of the head. The textured pixie, done well, is not a masculine cut. The softness comes from a few things. The length on top, the way the sides are tapered rather than faded hard, and the styling. A little curl through the top with a small barrel iron, or even just some texture cream scrunched in while it's damp, gives it a softness that reads as very feminine without being fussy. The other thing I'd say about this is that confidence changes how a haircut reads. I know that sounds like something you'd put on a motivational poster, but I mean it practically. A haircut that you chose, that you asked for specifically, that you understand and know how to style. That haircut looks different on you than one you settled for. It sits differently. You carry yourself differently in it. And that difference is visible. How to ask for this one at the salon. And please, write this down if you're considering it. Say, I want a textured pixie with real length on top, at least 2 to 3 inches that I can style. I want the sides tapered, not faded, and I want to keep some softness around the ears and the nape. Don't go too short at the temples. And I want the overall finish to look a little textured and natural, not slicked down or overly polished. That description is going to do a lot of work for you, especially the part about the temples. A lot of stylists will go quite short there by default. And that's one of the things that can tip a pixie from modern into dated very quickly. Keeping a little softness there keeps the whole cut feeling current. The biggest mistake women make with this cut, similar to the lob, is letting the stylist talk them into going shorter on top than they intended. It happens in the chair, in the middle of the cut, when things start to feel a little uncertain. The stylist suggests taking a little more off, you're not sure, you say okay, and suddenly the length that was the whole point of the cut is gone, and you're left with something much closer to the traditional shortcut you were trying to avoid. Trust what you asked for going in. If you did your research, if you brought a reference photo, if you communicated clearly, trust that. You don't have to say yes to every suggestion in the chair. Your hair at 60 is different from your hair at 35. That part is true, but different isn't the same as worse. It has different qualities, different needs, different behaviors. And when you understand those things, actually understand them, not just get handed a list of products to buy, you can make choices that work with your hair instead of constantly fighting it. That's what I want for you. Not damage control, just a better understanding of what you're actually working with. So let's talk about that. Color first, because I know it's on a lot of your minds. The gray question, to cover or not to cover? And I want to be honest with you. I'm not going to tell you what to do here because I genuinely believe this is one of those decisions that belongs entirely to you. What I can do is give you some things to think about that might make the decision a little clearer. The first thing is this. The conversation around gray hair has shifted enormously in the last several years. Gray hair used to be treated in the beauty industry almost universally as something to hide, something to manage and cover and apologize for. And that's changing. You're seeing gray hair on women in campaigns, on runways, in spaces where it simply wasn't before. And a lot of women over 60 are finding that embracing their gray, really leaning into it, styling it well, caring for it properly, is actually making them look more striking, not less. But, and this is important, why that's not true for everyone. And the women for whom it works aren't just lucky. They're usually doing a few specific things that make their gray look intentional and healthy rather than dull and flat. The biggest one is toning. Natural gray hair has a tendency to pull yellow or brassy over time, especially if you're using the wrong products or if you have hard water at home. A good toning shampoo, a purple or blue shampoo used once or twice a week, not every day, can make an enormous difference in how your gray reads. The difference between gray hair that looks silvery and luminous and gray hair that looks dingy and yellowed is often just toning. It's a small thing with a disproportionately large impact. The second thing is shine. Gray hair, because of the way the hair structure changes when pigment is lost, tends to be more porous than pigmented hair. More porous means it absorbs and loses moisture more quickly, which can leave it looking dull. A lightweight shine serum, just a small amount, worked through the lengths and ends after styling, can bring it back to life in a way that's quite dramatic. You're not adding product buildup. You're just sealing the surface of the hair shaft so it reflects light the way healthy hair is supposed to. Now, if you're on the other side of this and you want to keep your color, whether that's your natural shade or something close to it, that's completely valid too. But I do want to mention something that I see come up a lot with women in their 60s who are coloring their hair regularly. Overprocessing is a real concern at this stage, and it's worth taking seriously. Because the hair is already dealing with the physiological changes we talked about earlier. The density shifts, the texture changes, the slower growth cycle. Adding aggressive chemical processing on top of that can push fragile hair further than it wants to go. You might start to notice more breakage, more dryness, a texture that feels almost gummy when it's wet. Those are signs that your hair is struggling with what you're doing to it, and it's worth having an honest conversation with your colorist about that. This doesn't mean you have to stop coloring. It means being strategic about how you do it. Longer gaps between full color appointments, glosses or toners instead of permanent color when you just need a refresh. Treatments worked into your routine that help restore some of what the color process takes out. These things add up, and if you're somewhere in the middle, partially gray, partially colored, not sure which direction to go, that transition phase is honestly one of the hardest parts of this whole conversation. Because it requires patience that most of us don't have when we're staring at our reflection every morning. What I'd say is this: find a colorist you actually trust, not just one who's convenient, and have a real conversation about a transition plan. A good colorist can help you get from where you are to where you want to be, in a way that doesn't destroy your hair in the process. That conversation is worth having. Now, care. I'm going to give you 3 things, just 3. Because if you do these 3 things consistently, they will have more impact on how your hair looks and feels than any expensive treatment or complicated routine. The first one is sulfate-free shampoo. I know this has been said 1,000 times, But I keep saying it because I keep seeing women with dry, fragile, overprocessed hair still using shampoos with harsh sulfates in them. Sulfates are the detergents that make shampoo lather aggressively. They clean effectively, but they also strip the natural oils from your hair and scalp. And at a stage of life when your scalp is already producing less oil than it used to, that stripping is doing real damage. A sulfate-free shampoo cleans your hair. It just does it more gently. The lather is less dramatic, which throws some people off at first, but your hair will thank you within a few weeks. The second thing is heat management, not elimination. I'm not going to tell you to throw away your blow dryer, because that's not realistic, and a blow dryer used correctly is actually fine for your hair. What I'm talking about is reducing unnecessary heat. If you're using a flat iron every single day on hair that's already fragile, that's a problem. If you're blow drying on the highest heat setting because it's faster, that's worth reconsidering. Medium heat, a good heat protectant applied before any tool touches your hair, and giving your hair a couple of days a week where you're not using heat at all. Those 3 adjustments alone will make a noticeable difference in your hair's condition over time. The third thing is scalp health. Your scalp is where your hair grows from. It's the foundation. And if your scalp is dry or congested or not getting adequate circulation, your hair is going to reflect that. You don't need a complicated scalp routine. What you do need is to actually pay attention to it. A gentle scalp massage a few times a week, just your fingertips, a minute or 2 while you're shampooing or even just sitting watching TV, improves circulation and keeps the scalp environment healthier. And if you're dealing with persistent dryness or flaking, address it directly rather than ignoring it. There are good targeted scalp treatments available that aren't just dandruff shampoos. It's worth looking into. Those 3 things: sulfate-free shampoo, thoughtful heat use, and scalp attention. That's your foundation. Everything else is optional. I want to end with something that I've been thinking about how to say for most of this video because I don't want it to come out sounding like a speech. There's a version of getting older where you gradually hand over decisions about your appearance to other people. Your stylist decides what cut makes sense for your age. Advertising decides what products you need. Fashion tells you what's appropriate. And slowly, without really choosing it, you end up looking like a version of yourself that was designed by committee, by everyone except you. The women I've seen who look genuinely, strikingly beautiful at 60, 65, 70, they're not the ones who found the secret product or the perfect cut or the right color formula. They're the ones who stayed in the conversation about their own appearance, who kept making choices, who pushed back when something didn't feel right, and kept looking until they found what did. That's not vanity. That's not superficiality. That's just deciding that you're still worth the effort. And you are. The 3 cuts we talked about today, the lob, the soft layer cut, the textured pixie, none of them are magic. They're just options. Real options that work with your hair as it actually is right now, not as it was 15 years ago. And having real options is the first step toward making a real choice. Think about which of the 3 cuts felt most like you when we were going through them. Not the most dramatic one. Not the safest one. The one that made something in you go, maybe? That one. Write it down. Bring a reference photo to your next appointment. Have the conversation. And if your stylist immediately steers you somewhere else without really listening to what you asked for, find a new stylist. I mean that kindly, but I mean it completely. Tell me in the comments which cut you're thinking about. Or if none of them felt quite right, tell me why. Tell me what your hair is doing and what you're looking for, and I'll do my best to point you somewhere useful. I read the comments genuinely, and they shape what I make next. If you found this helpful, subscribe. There's a full video on thinning hair care coming, products, routine, the works, and honestly, it might be the most practically useful thing I put out this year. You'll want to be here for that one. Thanks for watching the whole thing. It means more than you'd think.